Calling all true crime fans. True Crime Forum is coming to the Northeast, and if you're curious about true crime beyond the headlines, this is for you. Join us on Saturday the 12th of July at the stunning Blackfriars in Newcastle upon Tyne for a jam-packed day including insightful talks, seminars and interactive workshops. Be there to witness campaigner-led conversations, live podcasts, self-defence classes and so much more. There's truly something for every true crime fan. True Crime Forum Newcastle is designed to explore crime and justice through real-life stories, breaking down taboos, academic discussions and practical hands-on classes. Oh yeah, and lunch is included. Expect stotties and chips to keep you going. Grab your ticket now. Visit northeasttruecrime.co.uk or Google True Crime Forum Newcastle and grab a ticket now. Come curious, leave inspired. True Crime Forum, July 12th, Blackfriars, Newcastle upon Tyne.
Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Casey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse, and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. And hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Casey, and today I'm joined by a new expert who's come to share their expertise with us on the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to linking their expertise with coercive control that we see beyond cults, but also cults as well. So hello and welcome to the show, Sonnet Damont.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
I usually start these interviews by asking people to introduce themselves to the listeners.
So I'm Sonnet Damont. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist based in Los Angeles, and I work primarily with survivors of relational trauma. So trauma in relationships, like obviously cult survivors, domestic violence, child abuse, trafficking, all sorts of different ways in which we can be traumatized within relationship to other people. I use EMDR, cognitive behavior therapy, positive psychology, feminist theory, and I've also had a year of training in existential therapy.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Feminist theory. Can you talk me through kind of in a nutshell what that is?
Yeah, so feminist theory is a smaller modality of psychotherapy that's based around sort of the principles of empowerment and questioning whether mental health symptoms are a reaction to navigating what it feels like to be like in I'm going to say an oppressed group as a woman. In most societies, that's the case. And what happens in feminist theory that's a little different than other types of psychotherapy is that we look at sort of society's view of us versus what we know is true inside. And then there's a lot of like empowerment through volunteer. So like if you have an experience, like let's say you did survive a cult, you would go out and you would do some kind of service to help other survivors. And that there's this link with giving back and what you've experienced and healing from it. And so they look at that and they study that. Another piece that makes feminist theory a little different is therapists will often self-disclose with consent. And if it's merited, right, if the client would benefit and they are okay with it, then there's a little more of like a balanced power dynamic in the psychotherapy. The therapist doesn't necessarily act as an expert. We're working together solving this mystery, and you leave with self-trust and empowerment.
That all sounds so incredible. I'm already thinking of so many different questions that I can ask you related to just that alone. I wonder how you got into this type of work. Is it something that you always had an interest in, something you always knew you would end up working in, or did you kind of accidentally find yourself working in the kind of psychotherapy and trauma field?
Interesting. I started out thinking that I wanted to work in government and policy. So I began like doing student government and journalism tasks. And then I transitioned over to working with young children. Quite honestly, I got really into music and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll want to perform and like build out this music career, which did not happen. And being a school teacher would be like a nice counterbalance to that. I find music, ironically, incredibly healing. We had music long before therapy, and the lyrics of music, all of that really was healing me. So I think that drew me that direction. And as I was teaching, I received something called the Pearson Teacher Fellowship, which is a teaching fellowship sponsored by Pearson that goes into like preschools. And our aim was to teach reading to children younger than is traditional in the US. We were trying to teach reading sooner to people. And of course, if you can learn to read a little bit younger, you start out in kindergarten already knowing how to read, you're going to have like a better chance at learning things faster. And while I was doing that teaching fellowship, I just kept finding myself drawn to children that were having social problems and mental health problems. They were just so sweet, and a lot of them were brilliant. And I ended up going back to school and getting a second bachelor's degree in psychology. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it, but I knew that I was more interested in talking to those kids and learning about those issues. And so my first job after my psychology degree was working in a safe house for trafficked children. And it was the first ever safe house for trafficked children. It was based in San Francisco, and it was a partnership between a couple nonprofits and just a very generous woman who loaned a house to try to help children. And and it was a great little job. I learned a lot about counseling from a very like basic perspective of being right in there with those young women all day. And as I left that position, I this is an odd one, but I started working as a personal assistant to Gigi Jordan, who was a pharmaceutical executive who needed a live-in preschool teacher. And I just kind of wanted to move my tools around and like see how this job would go. It sounded really interesting and exciting. She had a young son who had autism. And so I traveled with her as he received some FDA approved stem cell transplant to treat some of the autism symptoms. This was in 2007. And I don't know how old you are, Katie, but in 2007 in the US, stem cell transplants were considered like cloning and like really scary, and no one wanted them. Now, of course, they heal all sorts of autoimmune problems, and we're using them. I've heard of people using them to treat like muscle pain and different things now, but back then it was a really big deal. And as I traveled with them, I started noticing things felt off, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it or how that would be real, you know? And so I ended up leaving the job after like trying to get help for the child because something felt off. Other people filed CPS reports around that vein, like trying to help him, but there was just nothing we could do. The family was so wealthy, they could just bop from state to state. In the United States, if you file a CPS report or a child trafficking suspicion, and the family or the perpetrator lives in California and then they move to Nevada, or then they move to New York, from state to state to state, those reports, they're gone. There's no nationalized database. So you think people who have access to resources, they can just bop around, and they do. So as soon as a report comes, oh, let's switch counties in some states or just states altogether. So that experience really was challenging for me as a young woman. I ended up I had applied to like a bunch of master's programs for social work and psychology, and I found out that that Jude had been murdered by his mom, even though we had tried to help. There was nothing we could do. And I know this is a really hard story, but this is why I became a trauma therapist. This really just sort of shifted everything in my world, because I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what to do about it. And everyone around me tried to do did not work. And then, you could follow this case if you wanted, but you'd see that it went on for like 10 plus years. It ended up in the Supreme Court in 2023, before she ended up taking her own life, sadly. Somewhat of a epic journey, just kind of watching that dynamic play out and dealing with my own emotions through it, because I cared for him. And I loved him, and I tried to do what I could to make things right, as did a lot of people that were in his world. But it was just beyond our control, right? That's how it is sometimes. And through surviving that, I went back to school, and I got a master's degree and decided to become an LMFT, which is a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I have this very real lived experience of having been sort of I don't know, blinded to a psychopath's charisma, I guess, right? Even though there's a lot of wounds with people who commit crimes that heinous, and then continue to exploit political connections to stay free rather than take accountability. So I feel like I've got this great blend of like lived personal experience and training and genuine passion that I can bring into my sessions. And that is pretty much my history. Everybody ends up in their job somehow. I do sometimes wonder, like, what would have happened if music had taken off? Like, would I have ever healed inside, or, would I have been able to show up and help people in some kind of way? I don't know. But I love my job, and I love all my clients and all of the beautiful stories I've seen of healing. Yeah. Thank you.
When we do this kind of work, and we study psychology, and we go through all of these processes of understanding, like how the nervous system works and how the psyche works, it's really difficult to have any kind of magical thinking, or to not be super cynical around any type of magical thinking. But sometimes I do wonder if everything happens for a reason. It's one of those cliched sayings, but it's almost like you are where you were supposed to be through a set of really tragic circumstances.
Well, I don't know. What I do know is that I have a lot of drive towards feeling good and feeling healthy. And I honestly think that I just sort of went the direction that made my body feel more calm and relaxed, less adrenaline and cortisol. And I really do believe, in these principles of feminist theory, where if we give back in areas where we've had wounds, we feel energized and empowered, and it's good for our tummy biome. It's good for our brain chemistry. We have this natural sort of energy towards helping others. Like there's something in the integrity of that, and the passion of that. And so there we are, if you follow your healing, you might end up in a good spot that feels better for you.
That makes a lot of sense. The tummy biome, I know that if I am anxious or stressed, I feel it in my stomach before I feel it anywhere else. Like, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be sick. I don't know if, I don't know what's going on. That's wow. That's really interesting to me, on a personal level. Everybody that's listening is going to be like, Casey, move on about yourself. So, I have been informed that you're writing a book When Dangerous Feels Like Home. I don't know where you're up to in that process, but I'm really interested in learning more about what the book is going to be about, what inspired it, and, what's the journey looked like so far.
When Dangerous Feels Like Home is a true crime inflected memoir about my experience as live-in personal assistant to Gigi and what I went through trying to create a nationalized database for child abuse reports and human trafficking reports. And in this book, I sort of paralleled that experience with my own childhood and my own sort of choices and who I got close to. And I examine, why did I end up there? And I also examine, like, what am I going to do with this? And what am I going to use my life for? And it talks about why I chose to become a therapist and how I figured out how to heal. It's a memoir. Like, these are my stories and my experiences. So parts of it, I have an odd humor. A lot of traumatized people do. So parts of it are funny. I don't know how that'll feel for everybody. Parts of it, but it's real. It's human. And I hope that it is something that is normalizing and validating and empowering for people who have had real life show up and need to figure out how to organize themselves and learn to, you mentioned like brain chemistry and tummy biome, learn how to read their body and keep it grounded and make good quality choices. And I sort of, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I love cognitive behavior therapy, which is another form of therapy. And I feel like this book really shows how you integrate cognitive behavior therapy in your life without using clinical terms. Yeah, it's just sort of my legacy project. I don't have children. It's not going to happen. I'm an older gal. I have beautiful dogs and partnerships, and I love writing. I received the Hedgebrook residency, which is a writing residency that only 2% of applicants are awarded. It's highly competitive. And I've never written anything before. When I got into the group, all the girls were like already published and had applied like multiple times. I was just in there like, I care so much. And I poured so much of my heart into this book. And I want someone to find it and say, okay, this makes sense to me and I have hope too. And I can go use my life to do something good.
It sounds incredible. I mean, terms like EMDR and CBT, whether it's the acronym or the full term, it can feel quite intimidating if you don't really understand what those terms mean. So to have or like an accessible book that is relatable through human experiences, human stories, real things that have happened to real people, and also kind of be like a gateway or entrance into some of these clinical terms that are intimidating. That sounds like a win-win. Like, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, I tried to shy away from the clinical terms as much as possible and just sort of show the healing journey and just what I went through and how things kind of clicked and feel better now. And, life is still happening. I live in downtown Los Angeles, and right now we have like ice raids and really sad things. Like, I go outside and walk around my neighborhood and I see really sad things. I look people in the eye and ask people, good morning, how are you? Like normal day-to-day life. And there's a deep anxiety and sadness watching what's happening here right now, watching people hide in their homes or get just sort of like pulled out with proper paperwork. We don't know where they go. And in the midst of this, I am very much falling back on the things I learned throughout the course of my life, navigating this Gigi situation, and navigating, challenges in relationships with dark triads, people who don't have the best intention for other people. And what I do is I just go back to those basic self-care CBT skills. Like, I go outside and I know, okay, I'm going to breathe more air in my belly and I'm going to let myself have more water and I'm going to go on a long exercise walk or do some planks if I don't feel safe going outside. Or I felt relatively safe going outside as a white woman who's a citizen, right? I do find myself carrying my passport, which before, those would be something we locked away for special trips. But now we're like carrying them around just in case. And when life shifts and you've had these hard experiences and you've healed them, you've got extra tools so that you can survive well and be calm and strategic and show up for your people that you care about in the best way you can.
The title of the book, When Dangerous Feels Like Home, it's such a powerful title, because even you just describing your neighborhood and where you live, you know, that title can apply to certain parts of Los Angeles right now, certain parts in other areas of America and other parts of the world. But it also made me think about this phenomenon that's kind of just been given this kind of placeholder name, because I don't really know if it's the right term to describe it, or if we really understand what this phenomenon is of the cult hopping. So somebody goes from, you know, one abusive group to another, or one abusive environment, I would like to say, to another. You know, not intentionally. I think sometimes exploitative individuals will sense vulnerabilities that they can exploit, and that is often why individuals might find themselves targeted upon exiting a cult, being recruited into another psychologically abusive environment. I would like to ask you what your thoughts are on the psychological similarities between cults and abusive relationships, and why you think this cult hopping terminology exists to describe like a set of people that hop from, you know, one abuse to another.
Okay, I think that's a really nice question to look at, right? Because if you are a survivor of any of these instances, or you're just really curious about it, watching dynamics unfold sociologically or with your neighbors, or you just know there's a cult in your neighborhood, what is going on? What happens for people is basically called like a trauma reenactment. This is what we think, you know, at this stage, at least from what I've learned and studied. And the idea of a trauma reenactment isn't necessarily like I am consciously going out trying to find challenging people and not notice the red flags that there's something challenging with them. It's really like we haven't tended to our wounds. This is my theory and what I find as people do EMDR therapy and CBT therapy. If we haven't tended to our wounds and we go out in the world and we still have these unmet needs that these communities or these people we're tending to, we might not even notice the red flags that other people have similar traits or behavior. We just want to feel whole and connected and all of these things. So, for example, you know, like in my situation, if anyone does feel curious and wants to read my book, you'll see a lot of parallels between my childhood that sort of just matched me up just right to feel like Gigi was a smart, safe job for me. But a lot of young women, you know, that grew up with like two parents that got along and siblings and were doing sports and like more typical things, they would have gone to that interview and been like, this is fucking weird, and left. Sorry for the F-bomb. But that's the reality, right? People would see it, but I didn't see it because of untended to wounds. I didn't know the wounds were there. And that absolutely happens with cult communities too, right? And like, let's say someone's in like a 12-step group that gets a little subculty and a leader forms and bosses them around and bullies them, and it fills the mother wound. Or let's say same thing could happen with like a mindfulness group, you know, the person might need like a parenting figure and not know that they can do that for themselves now if they sit down and they look at all those wounds and they make sense of them and meaning of them and focus in on their own empowerment. And it is not necessarily like a stupidity or a self blame or like something you're doing wrong. It's literally like there's something you can't see because of the reality of how you were presented with information in this world, right? And my sort of go-to when I have a new client and they say, hey, I think I have CPTSD, and my childhood was like this. And then my husband was like this. And then I broke up and I dated this guy over here. And wow, it was so similar, but twisted in to the left instead of to the right. What I usually will have people do is we'll sit down and we'll create a timeline together. It's called a trauma timeline. And on the top of the line, I'll put a plus, and on the bottom of the line, I'll put a minus. And I'll just say, let's just go through your life together and let's write down all these wounds that in relationships that were negative for you. And then let's go over the line and let's write down all the things you enjoyed and ways in which you survived during that time on top of the line, so we can see life is full and rich. And you got some good lessons, but you got some hard ones that were too hard to look at. And then we just start breaking those down as like EMDR targets or processing verbally about how we're going to make meaning and learning as we go about regulating our adrenaline and cortisol that go off when we think about these things, when we remember them, and noticing what that feels like. And then eventually, I don't ever want anyone to leave therapy with me as a private practice, in my personal private practice. I do like some EAP work and different things too, which is a whole different modality. But when I have a client in my private practice, what we will do is make sure when they leave, they have a really good understanding of what healthy relationships look and feel like, and what it feels like in the body when you're excited versus scared. Like when this is a healthy next move, and that feels different than when, hey, adrenaline and cortisol is going off because I got complimented all day long via text. And I know something's not right about that, but it also was so flattering. And like we could sit down and kind of, you would define and pay attention to your own body and meaning making of your own experiences to know when is this anxiety and when is this a real threat? What's the difference between anxiety and excitement?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Those moments where you can feel anxious about something and feel like you're in danger, but actually it's just maybe had a comment that somebody said at the school gate and you rolling it around in your brain and you'll feel like you're in danger and you're like, hang on a minute, let's just yeah, to be able to have a set of skills that can help you in day-to-day exchanges where things like that happen is invaluable. I don't know the ins and outs of these different modalities. I only know the surface stuff from the psychology masters that I've done. But EMDR and CBT, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Can you give us sort of like an overview in a nutshell description of EMDR, how you as a practitioner use EMDR, and how EMDR might be able to help individuals that have experienced coercive and controlling behavior, whether that be in an abusive home or workplace or cult?
Yeah. So I love EMDR. The first time I did an EMDR protocol as a client, I was 20, I think I was 27. And that I was doing it while Jude was murdered, actually. I was doing EMDR with my therapist during that time. So it was mind blow, right? Because I could go in real time and like process what I was feeling and remembering while it was in the news. It was just like a lot. But I'm glad I had that little buffer of EMDR to help me in a matrix of how to think about these wounds and organize them. And when I had people do that trauma timeline I was talking about a moment ago, where when we first meet and we look at like, what are the experiences? What are the protective factors, the things that you enjoy that made life meaningful and beautiful at the same time? We are able to pull out EMDR targets by doing that together. And an EMDR target is a memory that is cringy, shameful, scary. Your body reacts in some kind of way when you think about it. And the event itself has lended to the way you feel about yourself. So you think of cognitive behavior therapy has like 3 basic tasks you're doing. You're learning about mindfulness. You're learning about common cognitive distortions and how to thought restructure, look at fear versus fact when you look at your thinking. And then you're going out and you're living life and you're extinguishing inaccurate, anxious reactions through exposure and reality testing with mindfulness and thought restructuring, right? Now, this idea of thought restructuring in CBT, the word sounds so creepy, especially if you've survived coercive control. But unfortunately, that's the word they use. But the idea of thought restructuring is, hey, there's like 25 or so cognitive distortions most humans do to some degree. You think like catastrophizing, black and white thinking, personalizing, these terms we hear all the time. That we even, if you have social media, which I don't recommend to anyone, but here we go. Lots of people have social media. And you're scrolling and you're looking at Instagram ads, and I'm in my late 40s, right? So I look at an Instagram ad and it's going to be pushing on my wounds, trying to sell me stuff. If I don't buy this lotion, I'm going to have all these horrible things happen to my face and all this stuff, right? Like it's going to push on catastrophizing, or it's going to push on black and white thinking. And so one of the benefits to doing this kind of therapy in CBT is you really learn to pay attention to the world around you and how you're manipulated in different ways with fear. So it makes you a better shopper, a better consumer, better at paying attention. And so the idea of these cognitive distortions, or these common errors that we make as humans, is that they're influenced by schemas. And schema is a word that's used in computer programming, but it is also really helpful in thinking about the way our minds learn to process who we are based on our lived experiences. So a schema in cognitive behavior therapy is basically like how you feel about yourself as a result of what you've lived through and what you like. So if you've survived a cult, right, or you've survived living with an entourage of people who are kissing up to a psychopath, then you are going to have certain beliefs about yourself based on some of those memories. And in EMDR, you're able to look at those memories and the way you feel about yourself as a result of having experienced them. And I'm so visual. Like, Casey, I'm going to show you images. I don't know how to explain it unless I show you an image. But so often what I'll do is I will be real direct with my clients. And I think having a therapist who's open is super helpful if you're planning on doing therapy. Feel into how it feels to be with a therapist. But so EMDR has this like basic line up, this protocol of things we do with the client. And with each target, we go in and we focus on the worst visual of the memory. And if you're listening to this, don't do it in your mind or try to. Just let yourself listen to the process, right? You focus in on a worst visual of a memory, and then you track how it makes you feel about yourself, the negative cognition. And then you track the positive cognition, how it should. What's the positive belief? So I could give you an example. Let's just like a random one. I don't know if you want to throw out like a random example, but I could talk through the process of EMDR if you'd like, and how you sort of end up in this position of having like a good resolve in the way you feel about yourself, even through a really hard memory. And so the idea is you go in and you look at the hard memories that influence how you feel about yourself, and you face them almost like CBT, we call it an imaginal exposure, but with EMDR, it's a real memory. So you're not imagining it happening in the future. You're going in and you're clearing the past. Those two therapies go so brilliantly together. And oftentimes they compete for for things. So the research isn't that, it's frustrating. I wish people would blend them together and research EMDR as an...
Gosh, I talk about this all the time. I talk about this kind of, and it goes back to what you were saying about there not being a national database, for things like CPS reports. There's no holistic approach to this work. And I find that with coercive control and the work that we look at here on the podcast, and what my master's research was based around, is this idea that everybody's looking at the same stuff, but each in their own corner of the room. And the room is something that we should all be paying attention to, holistically as a group. And unfortunately, that's just not the way that it works. People are doing their own thing. But everyone's doing the same thing. Everybody's talking about thought reform and indoctrination and brainwashing and radicalization and coercive control. And, essentially all of these things just describe a set of psychological techniques that people are subjected to for the same result, the same end result of controlling a person. So that's my soapbox, as everybody listening will know. And it sounds like you have kind of those similar difficulties in having like less of a holistic approach between different therapeutic modalities, even if they do complement one another.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the strengths of like having lived experience, right? Like you don't need the credit. You have the actual integrity and drive to try to get people healed because it's good for your body and it's good for theirs and it's good for creativity, innovation, all of it to be sharing space.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much to talk about with just even these two particular types of therapy, but I'm wondering, through your personal experiences and your professional experiences, what do you think are some of the early warning signs that we might overlook when not so much entering into relationships or groups, but when we find ourselves interacting with people and there are warning signs and red flags, what do you find are often some things that are overlooked or I guess kind of you think yourself out of the doubt?
Yeah. That's a great question. I feel like everyone thinks about that all the time. Like, what were the red flags? What could I have done to prevent myself from stepping into that one or reenacting in this other way that I didn't see coming? And you know what I think personally, looking at my own life and having introspection and then studying all these different tools and modalities, and then of course, working as a therapist with others, is that each one of us have our own sort of set of personal red flags, right? Like things we won't notice based on how we grew up. And doing that introspective work, being brave and looking at your hard memories, taking good care of yourself, eating, sleeping, exercising, being creative so that you can be paying attention and notice when things don't feel right. When something doesn't feel right, when there's a threat, our body will tell us. The adrenaline and cortisol, when we sort of notice like, hey, pattern recognition, this person said this, but now they did that and now they're saying this, will tell us. If we know how to like notice a tummy gurgle or notice our jaws tightening, or am I talking faster, or am I breathing more air in my chest than my belly? Like there's actual cues if we really slow down and make the time to learn how to read ourself and our own little kind of like red flags. But separate from going in and doing a trauma timeline and EMDR and all these tools that I have that I do with my clients, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it with different kinds of therapies, healing modalities, all that. But separate from that, I would say that there probably is like I'm going to say like a basic red flag out there that you could like watch for or listen to, right? And maybe it's the CBT therapist in me, studying about thought restructuring and cognitive distortions. But I think that there are sort of like basic things when someone is telling you things that are inconsistent. That's a huge red flag. If they said this but did that and you're noticing and it feels weird, that's a red flag. If someone is doing things that, how can I say it? I want to say like manipulative. But how do you quantify that where you like notice something's manipulative, But manipulation, like a red flag to me. Like if someone doesn't care about my needs and I'm saying, hey, that's too loud, or hey, I need this, I need that, and they just like get activated and then they tell me what they need louder, and it's not like a cooperative, we're listening to each other's needs and working together. That's a red flag, right? Like to me, If someone is pushing me and not caring or curious about what my needs are, or if someone is lying and there's inconsistencies, those are red flags for me, where I'm basically like, I don't think this person's qualified to be super close to me. They can absolutely exist in the world and learn their lessons with other people. Sure, great. I wish them well. But like my inner circle that I know I can do like high end creative, meaningful, impactful work with, it needs like a consistent set of like, I don't know, like integrity. And I think if we're paying attention, we can notice when people don't have that, or when our bodies are reacting to that. But is there
I find that tricky.
like love bombing? I mean, shoot, how do you like? A lot of people just get excited and text with their friends all day. Like, I don't know. There's some sort of love bombing that happens where like you can tell someone's trying to manipulate you by like complimenting you a million times, and you're like, wait, this feels fake. But you got to listen to your body.
It's hard. Yeah. I mean, I say this sometimes, my partner and I, we've been together for 10 years now, and I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop, because he is genuinely just a really great guy who makes me feel great and is really complimentary and super love bombing. And I'm just like, when's it? And he edits my stuff, so he'll edit it as well. But the difficulty is, as you said, it's kind of discerning. It's discerning the difficulties over potential abuse, or difficult moments in a relationship over toxic moments, because you can have an argument with your partner or your boss, or somebody in your church, and your adrenaline and your body can go into a different state, and you can feel like you're in danger, but it's just not quite abusive. And it's hard to recognize the difference between those two things. And sometimes you might think you're just having a falling out with somebody, and actually what's happening is the love bombing stage has ended, and now you're entering into that next stage of isolation and increased dependency, and the funneling into the center of the abusive environment.
Yep. And so my sort of go-to check for myself and what I talk through with others, and one thing, I had a amazing professor in grad school. He was so fun and funny, and he would always say like, therapy comes back to curiosity. And I was like, you know what, maybe he's right. And I started thinking about that in my own therapy, and as I was working with clients, there is an incredible amount of power in curiosity. If you are talking with someone and they are not curious about your needs, that's a big red flag, right? And so let's say someone is love bombing you, like in that example, whether they're a coworker, a creative partner, or someone you're dating. If you are getting all of this good praise, and then all of a sudden, here in the States, we call it negging, like someone just starts giving you like these little put downs. If that's happening, you're getting these little negative inputs, little baby put downs. And you're like, this doesn't feel right. And you bring it up to the person and you say, hey, I noticed you complimented all these things about me, but then today you just said that. And I'm curious, what's happening for you? Why do you think you said that for me? And you'll see their response. Oh, you're right. I was upset and I wasn't calming myself down. I don't think I exercised today. That's not true. I love you. I do think you're an amazing cook.
That's really interesting to me, because I was then going to say, well, what if you don't feel confident enough to have that conversation? But that answers itself, doesn't it? If you don't feel like you can bring that up to somebody, that's a red flag on its own.
There's a power dynamic there, yeah. Or just a need, right? Like when I think about kind of regulating my brain chemistry so that I am like in the best possible shape to show up for big weird life transitions, like what I experienced in my neighborhood, right? I think about adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline and cortisol in our minds are released through like the lizard brain, like activation of threat comes in, right? And adrenaline and cortisol go off. And there's ways in which we can turn the prefrontal cortex on through mindfulness, which is a lot of what cognitive behavior therapy teaches, right? So, you think like breathing into your belly, all of those things in the midst of trauma to bring yourself down so you can think well and handle a challenge. But there's preventatives too. And when I worked for the school district in San Francisco, I don't know which social worker or therapist came up with it, but we had this really cool like model of the brain. And so I'll show you as a hand puppet. You do like a high five hand, and then you put your thumb in the middle. In the middle, your thumb folded into the middle is meant to represent the amygdala, where adrenaline and cortisol go off, right? And the big fingers on top, each one can represent a form of self-care, that if you're engaged in this self-care, you're in a better position to read things and show up for yourself and have hard conversations, right? This is sort of like the foundation of what every human needs to show up. One is sleeping through the night. You need to be able to sleep. Exercise. We are animals. We have to move our bodies. It's good for our brain chemistry. It's good for our tummy biomes, all of that, right? And eating healthy. We have to eat healthy food. There's a great book called Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health by Lake and Shore that talks about all these studies on nutrition. I'm not allowed to do that. It's out of my scope as a therapist, but there's a lot of research on food that is good for our brain chemistry and our tummy biomes and our mental health. And then the fourth finger, right? Like you fold down all the fingers and you make a brain. This is the prefrontal cortex folded over the amygdala. So you've got eating healthy, sleeping, exercising, and then you've got authentic relationships with yourself and others, right? And if you don't have good social support and you're on a date and this guy's been, or girl, because women are absolutely, right? Like that's what my book is about, women behaving this way. And you're on a date and someone is love bombing you. And you're getting all these compliments, and then you're on like 4 dates in, 5 dates in, 10 dates in, and this person starts putting you down a little bit. Well, if you haven't been building out like strong social supports outside of that relationship, you don't have a friend you can check in with and say, hey, this is weird. They told me that they're going to leave me if I get fat, but everything else has been perfect. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have anyone to tell or talk that through with, you're not going to say anything. You're going to be like, well, what if I say something and then I have no one? Like there's absolutely to be like able to show up for life on a day-to-day basis and control our own adrenaline and cortisol. We need sleeping through the night, exercise, healthy food, and authentic relationships with ourselves and others. We need each other as people.
Absolutely. And you can so see as well how you would think your way out of that, think the doubts away or justify or, whichever, because I know people are very sensitive to different types of terminology. So I try and think about all the language that I'm using when I talk about these things. And you can almost see how in cults especially, and I know that, con artists are very good at this as well, saying a load of nothing and throwing in nuggets of truth. It's almost the same process where you can say, hang on a minute, I know that what you're saying is not accurate, it's not true, but the other things you said were. So maybe it's me, or maybe I don't know enough about it, because you say things with such charismatic conviction. And if you don't have somebody to talk to about that, and say, or even just to be able to go and Google something, but some people might think not, or not have the thought to confirm whether those things are true or not. So it's, we have these opportunities to, or hopefully have these opportunities to have conversations with people where we say, what do you think about this? Because I'm just not sure whether that's about somebody saying something negative or telling you an outright lie. I think I'm not very eloquent. I say this all the time. It's really hard for me to say what I'm trying to say in a clear way. So I apologize. But what do you think are some pieces of advice that you would give to people who are perhaps stuck in certain situations because of the kind of trifecta of fear, shame, and intimidation? Sometimes people, I've been in situations where I feel like I can't say anything or take action or do anything because of fear, intimidation, and shame, which are the staples of coercive control. I wonder what your advice is to empower people that find themselves unable to make change because of those psychological factors.
Well, first off, what you said was brilliant and made a lot of sense, right? Like, I think you described in a really like clear way for someone who has been in a group dynamic where things like that have happened, and hopefully people who have not can really piece that together and hear that it happens slowly over time, sort of like love bombing and people putting in the little negative digs to devalue you, but they start doing it with your concept of reality. And that is like brilliant. Like that's what it feels like to be in.
I wanted to say,
Yeah.
You've said it.
Because I paraphrase clients all day. People tell me what they're thinking, or they tell me some wild story, and then I got to say it back to them to make sure I heard it right, or else we're talking about two different things. So it's like all day long. So my thought on that is, and forgive me, I forgot what the question was, but I had to mention that because that made a lot of sense. I really felt into how those two are similar. What did you say?
I'm just wondering what your advice is around empowering people to make change when they are constrained by fear, intimidation, and shame.
Okay. I'm taking a second because I feel like it kind of goes back to that social support piece of our intrinsic human needs, right? Fear, intimidation, and shame are really social things that happen for us. And as humans, we need to be connected to other humans in order to survive. As much of an introvert as I feel like I am, I need to like go stare at the wall and be mindful and read in order to get my energy back to like show up for other people and like do stuff. I know extroverts, they like to go out and like hang out with other people and party or go for a run with a group or something, and then they're energized again. But nonetheless, wherever you fall on that introvert extrovert spectrum, you need some level of social support and community in order to survive. And you think like evolutionary, right? Evolutionarily, as beings, humans, our adrenaline and cortisol, they go off when we're threatened, when our life or death is threatened in some way. And so you think like social anxiety, or bullying, or being left out in some way. Like if we were in a smaller community, let's say we're like the first humans, if you believe in Adam and Eve, or let's say we're just like the first tribe of humans that exist on one continent for whatever reason, we ended up there. We would need to kind of huddle together and work together in order to build out a town and build out houses. And if we wanted to roam over to another town where there was more natural food growing, we would have to stay together in a pack. And if one of us was getting bullied or left out or somehow didn't fit in with the other humans and they were sort of straggling in the back, a bear would grab them and eat them, or a wolf or something. I know this is a crazy sounding example, but if you stay with me, there is like this piece of if we're not in the herd, we're not in the circle of humans, we're going to get eaten by animals or we're going to get left out. Like we need to be together. And that's why bullying feels like really scary. Like who cares if some girl in Pilates doesn't like me, if I can go over to Orange Theory and those girls are great? Like who cares, right? Totally illogical. Like maybe Orange Theory is closer to the house. These are goofy gyms and in the LA area. So point being, like we react to being left out, even though logically we know this isn't a big deal. There's other bits of humans, there's other places to go, because our brain chemistry goes off, because it's like a real basic drive that's connected to who we are as beings. And even though we can see like fear, intimidation, shame, someone leaving us out, and it isn't necessarily a big deal, we still react to it in a small way. Even if some people cut in front of me in line at Starbucks and kind of giggle, they don't care, right? That's fear, intimidation, shame in a sense, because I am feeling left out and I'm getting bullied. And I can't really say anything because I don't have 5 friends with me to say, hey, did you guys just cut in line in front of us? What's going on? These are sort of silly examples, but I'm trying to describe that, like, hey, this happens all the time in our brain chemistry, and it's more tied to how we are as animals, just beings, right? Like, our brain chemistry is reacting to the threat of being left out, because as we were forming as communities, if we were left out, we would die. Now, not so much the case, but our brain chemistry still reacts that way. Just like, and this is kind of a gross example, I'm sorry, Casey, but when I have tummy gurgles too. And so, like, if someone says something mean to me and I'm like, oh no, I misread this person and now I got to have a hard conversation, I totally want to go to the bathroom because my body wants to drop everything so I can run fast if it's a threat. Because that's how we survived as animals, to form like these cool communities and towns and countries and our interconnected planet. Yeah.
This is endlessly fascinating for me. I'm thinking all the time about how this relates to cultic environments, and cults are just heightened extremist radical subcultures. So all of these real life applications that you're describing can be directly applied to cults, and you just think about the dial is turned up to 11, and that is the same processes work, but just in a very insular, extremist way in cultic environments. So it might not be an interaction in Starbucks that is unsettling. It might be like a act of public ritualistic humiliation, where you're called out in front of a group of people, but it's the same thing, right? You're on your own against a group of people and you can't say anything because of the same mechanisms of fear, intimidation, and shame. This is just, I have a whole page of notes. I've just been scribbling so much down as we've been. Okay, but I go quiet and I'm just sitting here nodding. I'm writing. Yeah, this is just. I mean, you've mentioned a few things, nutrition essentials, a few different authors, practitioners, and obviously different therapy modalities. But when it comes to tools, books, practices, and things that you recommend to individuals that have experienced trauma from all areas of life, what would be some tools that you would direct them towards so that they can do their own sort of homework or learning outside of your professional capacity?
So one book I recommend pretty much across the board to everybody is called Full Catastrophe Living by John Kabat-Zinn. And it talks about mindfulness from the perspective of cognitive behavior therapy. So you get a lot of understanding about adrenaline, cortisol, the amygdala versus the prefrontal cortex, and how to start learning to tell when you're dysregulated or alerted, and how to bring the body down, and how to be able to think strategically in the midst of hard things. When people do like special forces training or SEERS training, which is like advanced military training in the US, they give a lot of emphasis on learning to breathe in the belly and learning to keep the body calm when something hard happens so that they can think strategically, right? How do you solve this problem? If you're a firefighter and you're going out into the world and your job is to risk your life day in and day out and walk through scary, hard places, you are being trained like, hey, this is how you keep your head. This is how you keep strategic. That's not religion. That's not spirituality. That's basic, like, hey, this is how brain chemistry works. How do you drive this thing? And so I love Full Catastrophe Living by John Kabat-Zinn because it's the story of the creation of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which is basically like how to keep calm and strategic when you have heart disease. And it's a bunch of studies on activities you can do, like belly breathing, going on walks, changing your temperature, getting something cold and holding on to it and breathing, when you notice that you feel alerted. And when you're calm, you can sort of evaluate whether or not it's a real threat or not. But if you're activated or you don't have good self-care, you're not going to be able to tell. And another book I love, way less academic, but it is a fun read. And if you have been through it, right, you would read this book and you would be like, oh, so validating. Like it's like a blanket of non-science. There is a book called Psychopath Free by Jackson McKenzie, and he wrote another book called Whole Again, which was basically a book about kind of healing from being somehow connected to a dark triad, which would be a person that is a threatening, that doesn't have empathy, and their drive is based less on connection and care and love and being with you, but their drive is based more on, let's say, with narcissists, external validation; with sociopaths, power; with psychopaths, it's often revenge or sadism, right? When people have those types of personalities and they're in leadership roles or they're in relationships with you, like whether it's a church leadership role or a I don't know, lucky you got the top dog as your husband, right? Great. When you're in one of those dynamics, there's absolutely like patterns of behavior and things that feel really crappy. And those books, Psychopath Free and Whole Again, do a really good job normalizing it and then figuring out how to get out of it and how to heal and how to make better choices and how to just kind of like let go and let yourself just be a human and show up and do the best you can. Shame is, I think about shame all the time. I joke with someone close to me about shame. Like, Brene Brown. I don't know. I love Brene Brown as a speaker. I love listening to her lectures, but her books, they're not a good flow for me. If I ever meet her or whatever, I don't think I ever would, but she and I can talk about that, and then she can, but I don't think she's the best writer or whoever's writing those books for her. Like, I think that's a stuck point for me when I read her writing. But this idea of shame that she talks about in the lectures and her research on it is fascinating. I don't know. I mean, I don't think we need no shame. I think there's a benefit to having less shame. But I think if we don't have any shame, then we don't take accountability and we don't show up and we don't care for people, right? And you look at these dark triad personalities that have no shame. You see them lying, you see them harming other people, you see them sexually exploiting other people, these things we see in cult dynamics where there's just zero shame. How are you showing up authentically in community if you have no shame? So being able to consciously watch your shame and pay attention to it. It's informing me. I have shame. Does this mean I'm a bad person? My adrenaline and cortisol are going off. Does this mean I shouldn't say anything? What do I do with this, right? This is where I can help find my red flag. If you have no shame and you're like, hey, they're shaming me, you might go way off the rails, right?
I mean, that in itself, I bet there's been some interesting research papers around the idea of personal shame and kind of like systemic, institutionalized, patriarchal shame. If you want to go down the feminist route and look at, women might feel shame if they go back to work after having a baby, or women might feel shame if they become stay-at-home mums and don't go back to work. Do you know what I mean? Like all of these different weird things that women might feel shame for, but actually, like, how much of that is self-shame, or how much of that is like, if you have an affair, that's a shame. In my mind, that's a shameful thing. If you don't feel, what's the difference between systemic shame and learned shame or communal shame that's being, that's generational by design, and how much of it is actually warranted shame?
Yeah, it is fascinating to think about, right? Like, we do need to think about our relationship to shame, but we shouldn't say all shame is bad. We've got too much shame, because it is informing. I think, what I try to do in my life when I feel shame is like stop myself and say, okay, wait, I need to take accountability here, or I'm being manipulated, but something is going on. Why do I feel shame? So breathe in my belly, have a drink of cold water, maybe journal, introspect. Like, where do I need to change something, or where is this? It's telling me something. And in the biology of wanting to stay home with a baby or bring a baby to work and all that stuff versus society saying, hey, you should stay home with that baby and be a trad wife. That's the word the young gals are using these days here. um So, I mean, it's really personal how people want to organize their lives, right? And other people's opinions can be helpful because it helps you say, like, hey, something feels weird. I want to like lean into my values and decide, but they shouldn't be bullying. And they absolutely shouldn't say like, hey, you're going to be out of the group, or we're going to call you names and intimidate you or use fear to make you do what we think you should do as a person in this office. Like if you don't come back to work, you've lost your job. Well, that's not a place I would want to work. I would rather work somewhere where they're like, hey, if you want to taper back in and be maximally relaxed and strategic and creative, I trust you. I know you're a good worker. So come back in here at the pacing at which you're ready. That is more logical to me. That's what I would do as a leader. Because I would want people that are creative, right? That are like passionate and they're like, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm not sitting here not having enough rest yet or whatever the deal is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes we're protected by, in this country at least, the Health and Safety at Work Act, which does protect people from, harassment and bullying in the workplace and targeted campaigns and things like shunning and nepotism and things. But I know that that's not the case am I right in saying in some states in America, you can just be told like you're fired and they don't have to give a reason?
Yeah.
Like, that's wild to me.
Yeah. What do they call it? I can't remember what the term is, but it's basically like, hey, you can leave whenever you want and I can fire you whenever you want, like no clause or something. I can't remember. It's like a bad long-term. It's a bad long-term strategy, really, because if you think about it, women make excellent leaders and workers. We're very strategic. We're very calm. When we regulate ourselves and we know everything going on, right? Just like men. I'm not to say men aren't strategic or calm, but there's something incredibly powerful about being a woman in this day and time with all this stuff going on and trying to have children. Women are more likely college educated than men at this point, at least in the US. Women are often higher earners than their spouses here in the US, which wasn't the case a while ago. And women are multitask problem solvers. You've got your job.
Well, I've got no others, don't they?
Yeah. It's going to be interesting what happens with AI because it's taken rid of a lot of those masculine jobs. A lot of the fields that are dominated by men are getting eradicated by AI. And it's going to just leave all these relationship-based jobs in women. It's going to be a real shift in leadership, hopefully. Yeah. And we'll see how that goes. I think men make excellent leaders too. But I think it has nothing really to do with gender. It has to do with brain chemistry. Can you keep your cool? Can you notice when your adrenaline and cortisol are going off and bring yourself down so you can make a long-term strategic decision that benefits your creative output as a team? And women are great at that because we're multitaskers oftentimes. Oftentimes, we get oppressed by systems and we have to learn to do that in order to survive, right? And men can get better at that too. You think military training, they get trained to do that well.
We've talked a lot about that on this show in terms of how it actually relates to indoctrination and brainwashing and all of those terms that people like to use. For anybody that's interested, there's a couple of episodes in the back catalogue about the Marines and their basic training and basically like how it aligns with cult recruitment.
I would love to listen. I would be very curious. Yeah. My thought on that is it kind of comes back around to paying attention to your body and learning to pay attention to your body and when the adrenaline and cortisol are firing. I love that Jon Kabat-Zinn book. It is just studies and labs about how to get your own body down as a person with heart disease so that you don't have a heart attack and die and so you can make slow strategic decisions. It's a great book about really driving your own mindfulness.
There's just so much that I had on my question list that we haven't been able to even touch, and I'm so fascinated by the things that we've explored. My brain is just going in a million different directions. I've kind of looked at the questions and given myself two more to ask. There was loads of things I wanted to ask around language and how parents can protect children in abusive homes. But my last two questions will be, how can the media do better when we're looking at the idea of trauma, being trauma informed, being sensitive and compassionate? What do you think the media can do better in supporting the processes of recovery, trauma victims in general? And lastly, what advice do you have for anybody listening that may be on that journey of recovering from trauma?
So in terms of like media and the sharing of information around trauma, there are psychotherapists all over the place like myself who will consult for free and gladly like participate in media interviews, or I've helped with some films and like talking to different directors or people that are talking about films that they're making and put in my input about what's accurate and what's healthy and safe. I think a lot of people do that. I think a lot of people available as therapists would gladly, if you call a therapist up and ask them what they think about an article you're writing, help you out for free. Additionally, journalistic integrity and values. I think a lot of these people working in the media need help too. They're traumatized all the time. Constant. Are they getting together and processing? Sorry, someone's handing me a coffee. Are they getting together and processing, what they're experiencing and figuring out how to ground and show up and care for themselves so that when they're writing these articles, they're writing them from a place of like matching their own values and helping the world, or old school journalistic values of like fairness and logic and reason, and here are the facts, not my opinion. I'm not writing from a traumatized, activated brain trying to, I don't know how else to say it. This is something that I deal with all the time. I love reading the news. The only thing I could afford to do in high school was journalism because it was free. So I got really into like balanced integrity values, right? That was a million years ago in the 90s. My thought would be for media to represent cult survivors better, or people who've survived interactions with dark triads. I mean, some would say even just like what it looks like looking at Americans navigating what's happening in my neighborhood, right? Like things like that. In order to represent that fairly, you could talk to a therapist. You could interview one, but you need to deal with your own feelings too and get together and start like processing and talking about what's happening for you all. That would be my thought on media. Like everybody just needs to start doing the work to heal so that they can share things. In terms of like what I would advise to cult survivors, or if you're questioning, like, am I in a dynamic? Is my 12-step group bossing me around too much? Is this not normal? Is my church bossing me around? Is this not normal? I'm feeling scared. Something feels wrong. I would start off by making space to check in with when your adrenaline and cortisol go off. Go journal. Go sit down and think about it. If you don't have safe privacy, grab a notebook and a journal and a pen and go somewhere, journal your feelings and try to get clear with yourself. Rip it up and throw it away, or flush it or burn it or whatever. Like, make sure you've got a space where you can start kind of grounding the self and looking at things logically. Like you think cognitive behavior therapy, that's full catastrophe living by Jon Kabat-Zinn. I mean, that book, it would be great if you were like, am I in a cult? Is something going on? Is this normal leadership? I'm feeling bullied in this office. Are we really supposed to be sleeping on the floor working 14-hour days? Hopefully that's not happening to anyone. But
Yeah.
but it's
Just to let the listeners know, we're not affiliated. We're not doing any marketing. We're not paid to promote.
No, not at all. I wish I should get a cut of that book because I have everybody reading that.
Yeah, no, I'm only joking it.
I should be talking about my own book.
Yes, actually, that's fantastic advice for the listeners. A really strong thing to end on, just reminding yourself to take small measures to take care of yourself and put yourself in a position where you are able to better protect yourself and understand yourself, and it can be quite daunting, but it doesn't have to be an immediate thing or fast thing. It can be a very kind of the slow way people get into cults and abusive environments, or are recruited in or born in, the slow way that kind of indoctrination and control process happens. The same speed to come out, slow, take your time. And, some of the small steps just given here are
that's your safety.
Invaluable.
Yeah. Like you think like a safety plan, right? If someone comes into therapy in California or in the United States for question whether or not they're in a domestic violence situation, it is not like, yeah, pack up your shit and go right away. It is very much like a slow process of slowly letting them decide for themselves if they're ready to go. And you don't want to how can I say it? You don't want to put yourself in harm's way. Like if you think if you left you would be at risk of violence, then you want to make sure you're really committed to go, because those back and forth periods are really dangerous, at least in divorces or domestic violence. When people are, if you're going to leave, you got to leave. If you go back and forth, that's when something really hard's going to happen. So
yeah. I think homicide rates are like, it's something wild, like 300% more like dangerous or something wild like that.
Yep. And those law lawyers are like in danger because the divorcing people are that's like the most dangerous job to have as a lawyer. Is really sad because it's such a hard job for those folks.
So in terms of your book, I don't know if you have like an idea of when we might be able to see it published, grab a copy, if you have any kind of like idea of a timeline. It's really exciting that we've got that we've had the chance to talk before it's published, because then I might be able to grab you for a follow-up episode where we can catch up after the publication.
Oh, I would love that. Yeah. So my book, When Dangerous Feels Like Home, is a true crime inflected memoir about my personal experiences, a live-in personal assistant to someone who was a dark triad or psychopath, and how that led me to want to become a trauma therapist. And currently, the book is done. I have finished it. And in the US, it's a really slow process for querying agents. I queried 2 agents that I was recommended to, and one of them's retired now, but it was such an honor that she wrote me back. So I felt like it was like the epic agent of my dreams. And then another one changed genres and is newer to the field. So I'm kind of like paused right now. I sent a query letter to maybe like 10 literary agencies, like principals, the people who own the agencies or run them. And that was a few weeks ago. And you're supposed to just sit and wait for a few months to see who reaches out. But if a publisher or an agent hears this and they have like a similar sense of integrity and values and principles towards helping people, I want this to be available to help people. I'm not like, I don't have energy to self-publish it. I would like to have someone else just sort of take it and really love it and make sure it gets to the right people. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on finishing the book. I hope that we'll have news soon that it's been picked up, because I would love a chance to read the book. I'd love the listeners to have that opportunity.
You can,
and I'll send you some.
I'll send you some as a beta.
Give me an ARC copy. Ooh.
Not the whole thing. I'm not allowed to give the whole thing, but I can give you like the pages, the proposal pages that I'm allowed to give out early at the start.
Yes, that would be amazing. That would be great.
Would love it.
I'd love to have a read. I just I feel it sounds as though it's going to be a really helpful resource to have in the world. So I really do hope that we have some good news soon. I will share with the listeners if we do get news of an update, and I'll be keeping a close eye on social media pages and your website, which is sonnetdaemont.com, and I'll put a link to that in the episode description for anybody that wants to have a look at your work, your services, and also keep their eye on any book updates as well. So yeah, that's not all of my questions, but we got through a good amount of them, and I can't tell you how energizing this conversation has been for me today. And I always feel a little bit apprehensive before interviews because and I'm sure that this happens for some people with therapy clients as well, that apprehension of kind of knowing that you're going to be around trauma, and vicarious trauma is a very real thing. So sometimes I can feel that in my body before an interview, and it dissipates once the interview starts typically. But this has just been energizing today. I've really enjoyed it. I feel invigorated, and I also feel smart because sometimes experts talk and it goes over my head, but I've managed to keep up today. So I'm appreciative of you for many different reasons. Thank you so much, Sonnet.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. That was a beautiful compliment, and I wish you the best. It seems like you're doing a great service for people with this podcast, and I'm going to go back and listen to those previous episodes. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to get through. So I usually just tell people, hopefully there's at least something in the back catalogue that would capture somebody's interest. And we just keep plodding along one day at a time with all of these things and fighting the good fight. And it's really nice to connect with other people who are doing the same with, fighting the good fight in their own way. And it all culminates to a better world. So thank you so much, Sonnet, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Have a wonderful weekend out there.